She won't respect your words, only your absence. This powerful video reveals why detachment, discipline, and emotional stillness make a man truly unforgettable. If you've been too available, too loyal, or constantly chasing her attention, it's time to change. Discover the Stoic path to reclaiming your power, purpose, and peace. Silence isn't weakness, it's your greatest weapon. Watch now to learn how detachment commands her deepest respect and shifts the entire dynamic. Respect begins where neediness ends. This truth often strikes hardest when it's too late, when a man has already bent over backward, offered the world, and still feels disregarded. You can give her attention, loyalty, gifts, words of affirmation, and consistency. And yet, if it's laced with neediness, it repels rather than attracts. The problem isn't your effort, it's the energy behind it. When your self-worth is tied to her reactions, when your emotional stability is hinged on whether she texts back, whether she smiles, whether she reciprocates, you've given away your power. That energy, that desperation cloaked as dedication, is what she senses. Even if she doesn't consciously realize it, on a deeper level, she begins to see you not as a grounded man, but as someone orbiting her, someone willing to shrink himself just to stay close. And paradoxically, the more you prioritize her above yourself, the less she respects you. That's because true respect only flows toward strength, specifically inner strength. A man who leads himself. A man who doesn't chase peace in someone else, but who builds it within. Detachment, when it's rooted in calm certainty rather than wounded pride, changes everything. You no longer need to explain, to prove, to perform. You simply exist in your lane, and that stillness, that absence of pursuit, is what makes her feel what she never did when you were always present. It's not silence, for silence sake. It's the reflection of a man who no longer trades his value for validation. And when she looks around and doesn't feel the pressure of your attention anymore, when she realizes you've stopped making her the center of your world, she doesn't just notice, she reevaluates. Because the man who no longer needs her presence to validate his own becomes the man who commands her respect. Not by chasing, not by convincing, but by walking quietly in self-honor. Let silence speak louder than words. One of the biggest mistakes men make when a woman begins to pull back is trying to fill the space with explanations. They write long texts, over-express their feelings, justify their actions, and try to regain control of the situation through words. But this only diminishes their power. The truth is, the more you explain yourself, the less she feels you. Words become noise when a woman has already begun to disconnect emotionally. What truly gets her attention isn't your efforts to be heard, it's your willingness to stop speaking altogether. When you detach, not with bitterness, but with certainty, when you stop reacting, when you simply step back into your own life without ceremony, the silence you create becomes deafening. It forces her to notice the void, the shift in energy, the lack of pursuit that once defined your dynamic. This silence is not about playing games. It's about embodying a man who no longer needs external validation. A Stoic man doesn't narrate his worth, he lives it. He doesn't post cryptic quotes or send emotional goodbyes. He just walks, unbothered, focused, grounded. He lets his absence carry the weight of his presence, and that absence starts to echo in the spaces where he once gave freely. The morning texts, the late-night check-ins, the constant reassurance. When those vanish, it creates a contrast so stark that it demands her emotional attention. And in that contrast, she starts to question, why isn't he trying anymore? Why does this silence feel so heavy? That's when the balance shifts. When a man chooses transformation over explanation, and when his silence is backed by growth, his energy redirected toward purpose, his time invested in his own elevation, she begins to feel everything she overlooked. This is the kind of silence that carries authority, not resentment. It's quiet power, it's clarity without confrontation. It's the disciplined presence of a man who no longer needs to be heard in order to feel whole. Her uncertainty is your power. Most men panic when a woman begins to pull away. They see her silence as rejection, her slow replies as a threat, her need for space as a countdown to being replaced. And in that panic, they react. They chase harder, they explain more, they try to fill the emotional void with effort, gifts, and words. But in doing so, they rob themselves of their greatest strength, the ability to remain steady in the face of emotional turbulence. When a woman becomes uncertain, when she distances herself, it's not necessarily the end. It's a test of your center, your emotional gravity. A Stoic man doesn't flinch in the face of uncertainty. He doesn't beg for answers or try to force closeness. He creates space, not out of pride, but out of calm control. That space, the stillness, the lack of emotional reaction, is what stirs something deep inside her. Because unpredictability isn't recklessness when it's rooted in discipline, it's power. Emotional stillness in the face of her inconsistency sends a signal she can't ignore. It tells her you're not at the mercy of her mood swings or attention span. It tells her that you won't be pulled into chaos just to feel close, and that alone makes you rare. Most men are readable, predictable, emotionally transparent. But the man who doesn't react immediately, who mirrors her distance with composed silence, who focuses on his path instead of pleading for her attention, that man becomes a mystery. Not a mystery built on manipulation, but one built on restraint and self-respect. She starts to wonder why you're not chasing, why you're not clinging, why you've chosen silence over engagement. That internal questioning unsettles her far more than any confrontation ever could, because she remembers the man who used to show up instantly, and now he's emotionally untouchable. This isn't a game, it's emotional sovereignty. You stop being the man she can control through unpredictability, and you become the man she has to evaluate differently. Her uncertainty, instead of being your downfall, becomes your leverage. It reveals to her that you've evolved beyond the version of yourself that once needed her approval to function. And in that void of your emotional availability, she feels what she once took for granted, not because you made her feel guilty, but because you stopped giving her the option to misuse your presence. The man who walks away with peace leaves a deeper mark than the one who storms out in anger. Any man can slam a door, send a bitter message, or cut ties in frustration. That kind of exit is common. It's expected. But the man who chooses to walk away in complete stillness, without rage, without fanfare, carries a presence that lingers far longer. His silence isn't an act of withdrawal, it's a declaration of inner alignment. He doesn't leave because he's trying to get a reaction. He leaves because he realizes his peace is no longer negotiable. When a woman expects you to fight for her, to plead your case, to beg for clarity or closure, and you give her none of that, it forces her to confront something she didn't anticipate. The reality that you don't need her anymore, not in a cold or punishing way, but in a powerful, self-assured one. The absence of your reaction becomes more unsettling than any outburst could ever be. She expects noise and drama. Instead, she finds herself alone with your silence, and that silence begins to echo in the spaces she thought you'd never leave. It's not just the lack of communication, it's the quality of your detachment that changes the narrative. You didn't explain, you didn't argue, you simply stopped showing up in ways she no longer earned. That level of calm presence, the decision to walk away with dignity, becomes something she can't stop thinking about. Because she realizes you're not just gone, you're centered, grounded, and entirely unreachable through the emotional tactics that once worked. Your neutrality haunts her because it's not laced with bitterness. It's the kind of detachment that comes from clarity, not chaos. It's the moment she stops being able to read you, manipulate your emotions, or trigger a response. And in that unfamiliar stillness, she starts to question everything she took for granted. Why didn't he fight this time? Why isn't he trying to win me back? The strength of a man who doesn't flinch in the face of rejection speaks volumes, not because he's trying to make a point, but because he has no point left to prove. He has mastered himself. He's no longer driven by a desire to be needed, chosen, or understood. He's simply walking in a direction that honors his value. That kind of man becomes unforgettable, not because he tried to be, but because he chose peace over performance. And in the void he leaves behind, she finally realizes the difference between a man who walked away for attention and a man who walked away because he respected himself too much to stay. Detach to rediscover direction. Many men don't realize how far they've drifted from their own path until the moment they're forced to pull back from a woman who no longer values their presence. What starts as a subtle compromise, cancelling plans to be more available, texting at the expense of rest, shelving goals to keep her interested, slowly becomes a full-scale abandonment of self. And the tragedy is, it's not even obvious until you've emptied yourself. But when you finally detach, when you decide to step away from the gravitational pull of her mood, her attention, her approval, something powerful happens. You return to your center. Detachment isn't just about stepping back from her, it's about stepping back into yourself. It's the realignment of priorities that you once had before you lost them trying to win her. It's the return to your routines, your ambition, your mental clarity, everything that made you magnetic in the first place. And the more grounded you become in that mission, the less you feel the need to be noticed by her. This isn't a passive retreat. It's an active pursuit of growth. You start waking up earlier, training harder, working with deeper focus, and surrounding yourself with things that pour back into you. That shift in energy is undeniable. You no longer need her to text you good morning to feel seen. You no longer refresh your notifications hoping she noticed your silence, because your validation now comes from your alignment, not her attention, and she feels that. She sees the man who once made her the center of his world, now building a world where she no longer resides. That's not revenge, it's resurrection. You're resurrecting the version of yourself that had a vision, a purpose, a direction that didn't revolve around her emotions. And ironically, that's when she starts to look back. That's when the silence becomes deafening for her. Because now you're not waiting, reacting, or watching. You're leading. You're flourishing. The man she once saw as predictable, as emotionally available on demand, has evolved into someone who no longer needs her recognition to stay motivated. And that kind of transformation is not only respected, it's deeply attractive, because it signals strength, independence, and emotional depth. You didn't detach to punish her, you detached to re-align. And with who you were always meant to be, you've stopped orbiting her and started building a life that commands attention without ever asking for it. That's when direction becomes your new dominance, and in that forward momentum, she feels the full weight of what she lost. So in the end, it's not your words that earn her respect, it's your silence. It's not the effort to keep her that shifts the dynamic. It's the courage to walk away when your value is overlooked. Detachment isn't about playing games or trying to trigger a reaction. It's about returning to your path, your peace, your power. When you stop chasing her and start choosing yourself, something transforms, not just in her perception of you, but in the man you become. Because the most powerful version of you is the one who no longer needs to be understood, chosen, or validated. He simply moves forward with discipline, direction, and self-respect, and that man is unforgettable.